You will have an evening you will never forget. And that is why we travel the world. I want to touch the hearts of the people.
The music world froze when André Rieu, the king of Waltz, collapsed mid-performance at 75. The audience gasped. The orchestra faltered. The lights for a moment seemed dimmer, as if reflecting the fragility of a legend brought down before their eyes. André had been untouchable for decades, a virtuoso whose very presence commanded stages, whose bow could turn a hall into a cathedral of emotion. Yet here he was, at the pinnacle of his career, halted not by scandal or age, but by forces unseen. Deeply personal and relentlessly human, questions rippled through the world. What could have triggered this collapse at the height of his brilliance? To understand, one must travel back through the decades that shaped him. A life of beauty intertwined with hardship, passion shadowed by pain. Every triumph, every note played, bore the echo of struggle, the hidden tremor of a life lived under. Impossible expectations born into a household where discipline reigned supreme. André's early years were a world of silence and severity, a place where creativity was seen as a weakness rather than a gift. Yet, even in those rigid confines, a spark flickered, a quiet tremor of possibility. It wasn't recognition, applause, or even victory that stirred him. It was the faint, intimate sensation of life itself, whispered through music. That tremor would grow, carrying him to stages around the world, and yet remain fragile, vulnerable to forces no applause or accolades could shield him from. The fateful stage in Mexico City was more than just a concert hall. It was the culmination of decades of childhood scars, of rebellion, of love found and lost, of battles fought in silence. That collapse was not just a physical failure, it was the manifestation of a lifetime of triumphs and tribulations, the human side of a figure the world had long regarded as untouchable. André Rieu was born on October 1st, 1949, the third of 6. Children in a household that valued control over comfort, discipline over warmth. His father, also named André, was a renowned conductor whose authority extended seamlessly from orchestral podiums to the very walls of his home. He ruled with a baton in one hand and an iron will in the other, a man respected on stage but feared. In the domestic sphere, love, in that household, was abstract, cold, and transactional. Laughter was rare, and affection even rarer. André's mother was equally formidable, though her battlefield was the mind rather than the stage. She obsessed over grades and skill, treating imagination as a liability rather than a gift. When a teacher praised André's artistry, her voice would ring through the house not as celebration but accusation, a reminder that creative impulse was weakness, not strength. "My parents didn't love me," André would later admit, not as a wound dredged up, but as a quiet statement of fact, a recognition of a childhood hollowed out by expectation. In this austere environment, young André found little room to breathe, let alone create. Yet even in silence and pressure, the seeds of rebellion took root. Music was more than escape. It was a lifeline, the one realm where he could exist without judgment, where his spirit could stretch beyond the confines of his home. But at this stage, joy was fleeting and expression dangerous. Every note played outside the rigid expectations of his parents risked reprimand. By the time he was a teenager, the clash between his inner world and the outer reality intensified. The waltzes that drew him toward grace and fluidity were scorned at home. "I didn't raise you to play waltzes," his father would scream, not merely correcting his style but attempting to crush his soul. It was a period where music became both salvation and battleground, and where the young boy began understanding that brilliance often required sacrifice, resilience, and an unwavering belief in one's own path, even when the world, or one's family, stood against it. At age 5. André's life took a dramatic turn with the arrival of a slender, graceful mentor, barely 18, who would become his first violin guide. Unlike his parents, she did not reprimand or restrict. She coaxed him to feel, to breathe life into every note. In the sweep of her bow, young André discovered freedom, something he had never known before. It was not love, nor romance, nor triumph. It was the first whisper of a life lived fully, vibrating through strings and resonance. This was the moment that transformed his relationship with music from duty into devotion. While other children practiced scales, André chased the vibration of sound itself, the resonance that spoke to the soul rather than the ear. Joy, however, came with its own cost. His emerging passion for waltzes directly conflicted with his father's. Rigid ideology and the scorn he received at home was relentless. But in these early moments, the seed of a rebellion that would define his career was planted. Music became both sanctuary and compass. André learned not just technique, but the language of feeling, the subtle art of translating human emotion into melody. Those early lessons, gentle yet profound, laid the groundwork for a career that would one day electrify stadiums, move entire audiences to tears, and challenge the traditional boundaries of classical music. By 1968, another pivotal figure entered. André's life, Marjorie, his chosen companion and eventual partner in life and vision. Unlike a conductor's score, Marjorie represented choice, companionship, and the courage to step outside the constraints of parental expectation. The reaction at home was immediate and furious. André's mother demanded her departure. Rejection piled upon rejection. Yet André made the irrevocable decision to leave that home behind. That departure was not merely physical. It was symbolic. André never returned, leaving behind the empty shell of a house that had shaped and scarred him. His parents never attended his performances, a silence that would haunt him despite the roar of tens of thousands of fans. Applause could never fill the void left by a family that had failed to nurture or support him. Yet in leaving, André discovered autonomy, independence, and the space to cultivate his genius without constraint. Marjorie became not only a companion in life, but a pillar behind the scenes, a partner who understood both the fragility and ferocity of his talent. Together, they would navigate the difficult path toward a career that sought not just recognition, but revolution in the world of music. In 1978, André took the first steps of what would become a seismic shift in classical music. He founded the André Rieu Orchestra, a modest group of 12 musicians performing in community halls, backyard weddings, and overlooked towns. There were no critics to impress, no grand stages, only music shared for its own sake. Marjorie quietly handled the logistics, bookings, and ghostwriting arrangements, the invisible force behind the visible magic. By 1987, André formalized his vision with the Johann Strauss Orchestra. 12 musicians, yet a radical mission: to restore the heartbeat of music, to transform the way audiences experienced joy and melody. Gone were the black tailcoats and rigid formality. In their place came color, vibrancy, and a philosophy that music should dance as freely as the people it moved. Their 1988 New Year's premiere was electric, filled with light, laughter, and melody. Critics scoffed, calling it frivolous, but audiences surged, feeling the liberating power of music performed for joy rather than ceremony. By 1995, their impact had crossed into the realm of legend. At the UFA Champions League final in Vienna, André led the orchestra as Schickowitz's Waltz New swelled across the stadium. Football fans paused, swayed, and clapped, the tension of sport dissolving into rhythm. The album soared, topping charts in the Netherlands for 19 weeks and selling millions globally. Australia followed, with stadiums like Melbourne's filled to capacity. André stood shoulder to shoulder with contemporary pop icons, his waltzes entering the mainstream consciousness in a way few classical musicians ever achieve. Yet, despite the adulation, detractors remained. Traditionalists sneered, calling his work musical pornography, mocking the joy he brought to art. But for audiences, André offered something far greater than performance. He offered hope, shared humanity, and an emotional resonance that transcended criticism. Success, however, did not make André invulnerable. In 2010, at age 62, he was struck by a viral infection targeting his vestibular nerve. The recovery was painstaking. Conventional therapy failed repeatedly. Then a letter arrived from an Australian fan detailing exercises that had helped him recover from the same affliction. André followed these instructions with desperate faith. Gradually, the vertigo subsided, allowing him to stand again, first unsteadily, then firmly. Yet the experience left a mark. The inner ear, once assaulted, remained a weak point. Even as he returned to the stage, everyone believed he was whole. But traces of vulnerability lingered, invisible to the cheering audience but etched deeply within him. In December 2016, another blow struck. Roer Merckx, André's longtime trombonist and friend, died in his sleep. André's grief was immediate and devastating. Shows in Nottingham, London, Birmingham, and Glasgow were cancelled. The loss was not professional but profoundly personal. Roer had been like a brother, a pillar in the orchestra that had become André's family. When performances resumed, the music carried the weight of absence. Every note was tinged with sorrow, yet also with remembrance, as if André's bow was translating grief into a language audiences could feel but not name. It was a reminder that even legends, no matter how celebrated, carry private burdens invisible to the world. In 2019, a vicious flu swept through, leaving André shivering with fever as he took the stage. The smile remained for the audience, but those who knew him saw the battle waged silently. Every movement, every bow stroke was an act of resilience. Fame and success could not shield him from human fragility. Yet André persisted, driven by the same love of music that had carried him from the rigid walls of his childhood to the grand stages of the world. March 2024, Mexico City. 6 sold-out concerts. The promise of triumph hung in the air, but underneath, André's vulnerabilities remained. Years of physical setbacks, emotional loss, and relentless touring had weakened the pillars that once seemed unshakable. On stage, with lights bright and audiences rapt, the weight of decades collided with the demands of the moment. And then it happened. Mid-performance, the maestro faltered. The bow slipped. The orchestra wavered. The audience watched in disbelief as a legend, human, fallible, deeply worn, collapsed. It was more than a moment of physical weakness. It was the manifestation of a life lived intensely, joyously, and painfully. André Rieu's story is one of paradox, brilliance and fragility, triumph and heartbreak, passion and loss. From a childhood devoid of warmth to the dizzying heights of global acclaim, he remained human, vulnerable, and fiercely devoted to the music that defined him. His life reminds us that behind every legend lies a story of struggle, resilience, and quiet battles unseen by the public eye. Music, for André, was never merely performance. It was salvation, expression, and lifeline. Even when the world watched him falter, even when grief and illness threatened, he returned to the stage, carrying the collective hope, joy, and humanity of those who followed him. The applause, though loud, could never measure the depth of what music gave him, and what he gave the world. André Rieu's impact on music extended far beyond the concert hall. His innovations in waltz, blending classical technique with a sense of freedom and color, reshaped how orchestras approached performance. Younger musicians looked to him not just for mastery of the violin, but for the philosophy he carried into every note. That music is alive, breathing, and meant to connect rather than intimidate. Schools, academies, and conservatories began to incorporate his style, Teaching students to feel resonance rather than merely perfect scales, his influence spilled into popular culture. Collaborations with contemporary artists, sometimes even pop icons, brought his orchestral waltzes into stadiums, festivals, and recordings that topped charts usually reserved for mainstream music. In doing so, André bridged the divide between classical tradition and modern accessibility, proving that sophisticated music need not be distant or elitist. But his greatest legacy was not measurable in sales or awards. It lay in the countless moments of shared emotion. The grandmother holding a grandchild's hand as the orchestra's melody swept across a hall, the stadium full of fans swaying in unison, tears glimmering under the lights. Each performance carried with it the possibility of transformation, of turning silence and isolation into communion. André didn't just teach music, he taught how to live through music, and how to find hope in the sound of a waltz. While the world saw André as the unstoppable maestro, few understood the machinery that made the magic possible. Behind every bow, every soaring melody, stood Marjorie, and a small, devoted team who handled logistics, bookings, and the unseen pressures of running a touring orchestra. Marjorie's precision was as vital as André's artistry. Without her, concerts would have faltered, deadlines would have slipped, and the orchestra would have lacked the structure needed to thrive. The backstage world was far from serene. Long hours, travel exhaustion, and emotional strain tested every member. Relationships were forged and tested as the weight of expectation pressed on even the most resilient musicians. André, despite his larger-than-life persona, depended on this invisible network to maintain both artistic integrity and physical stamina. His brilliance on stage was only sustainable because of the labor, care, and attention paid behind the curtain. Ghostwriting arrangements, scheduling nightmares, and last-minute crises were common, but Marjorie's steady hand ensured they remained invisible to audiences. André's creative genius flourished because the surrounding team absorbed the chaos. In many ways, the orchestra was a family in the truest sense, not just bound by music, but by mutual dependence, love, and an understanding of the sacrifices necessary for excellence. Every performance, then, became the culmination of unseen labor, a delicate balance of artistry and administration, passion and precision. Without acknowledging the backstage, one would never fully grasp the depth of André's achievement, not only as a musician, but as a visionary who could inspire, sustain, and transform. André Rieu's philosophy of music was revolutionary not because it rejected tradition, but because it embraced humanity. He believed that music was not simply to be performed, it was to be felt, shared, and lived. Every waltz, every note he played was infused with emotion designed to touch the listener's heart, to create a moment of pure connection. For him, the audience was not a passive observer, but a participant in the narrative of sound. He rejected the solemnity and rigidity often associated with classical performances. Formal black tailcoats, austere concert halls, and intimidating silence were, in his eyes, barriers to joy. He wanted music to breathe, to dance, to evoke laughter, tears, and wonder. Critics may have labeled this approach frivolous or mockery, but to André, it was truth. Art must resonate with life, not just tradition. Through his philosophy, André redefined what it meant to be a classical musician in the modern era. Music became an act of hope, a way to heal, and a bridge between generations. For audiences, each performance was not merely entertainment. It was a shared human experience, a reminder that amidst chaos, loss, and grief, beauty could still be created, felt, and passed on. In this belief, André left a legacy far larger than his records, concerts, or awards. He left a blueprint for how music could connect souls across time and space. After the dramatic collapse in Mexico City, André Rieu faced a new reality: vulnerability, caution, and the limits of the human body. No longer could he rely on invincibility or the stamina of youth. Yet even in the face of fragility, his devotion to music remained unwavering. Recovery was gradual, a painstaking balance of therapy, rest, and a renewed understanding of the body that had carried him so far. The final years of his career were marked by reflection. André considered the highs, the sold-out stadiums, chart-topping records, and global acclaim, and the lows, illness, loss, and the unhealed voids of his childhood. Each concert became an act of gratitude, each bow stroke a tribute to a life of resilience. Audiences continued to flock, drawn not just to the music, but to the presence of a man who had endured so much and emerged, imperfect yet unbroken, to share his gift. Even as he faced physical limitations, André's creative mind remained as vibrant as ever. He experimented with new arrangements, mentored younger musicians, and ensured his story teaches us that even legends are human, vulnerable, and shaped as much by their struggles as their successes. The applause, though powerful, was never the point. What mattered was the hope and emotion his music gave to audiences, the way it bridged generational, cultural, and emotional divides. In the end, André's legacy is not just recorded in notes or trophies, but in hearts touched, tears shed, and spirits lifted. He showed the world that true artistry is not measured by perfection, but by courage, the courage to create, to endure, and to share one's soul fully. André Rieu may have faltered on stage, but through his life and music, he never truly fell. His waltz continues to echo, a reminder that even amidst fragility, human spirit and beauty endure.